This month, we've got everything from intimate partner murders to revenge murders and greed murders, all perpetrators having been sentenced in October 2025. And when I tell you that you'll be meeting a notably sadistic murder in this video, I'm not actually talking about the one whose perpetrator calmly told a 999 operator that he was both stabbing and drowning his victim to make sure that he killed her, which is where we start. After stabbing his girlfriend, 24-year-old Claire Leveque, to death in the hot tub of his mother's home, which is in Sandnes in the Shetland Islands of Scotland, the man having stabbed Claire multiple times, 41-year-old Aren Pearson told police that Claire had stabbed herself. At the time of her murder, Claire had only just turned 24. She had travelled thousands of miles away from her home in Canada to go and live with Aren Pearson and his mother at Sandnes. She had no UK passport, no permission to work and no driving licence. She was clearly vulnerable and isolated. That said, Aren Pearson's mother described Claire as a lovely young girl who was kind and thoughtful, so clearly being vulnerable and isolated didn't have an impact on the young lady's obvious good nature. Now viewer, if I've got you hooked on the video so far, do subscribe, give the video a like, drop a comment when you're ready and donate. Hit the thanks button below, I'll appreciate you. The forensic pathologist who gave evidence identified 55 distinct injuries on post-mortem examination of Claire. He described this as a minimum number because some of the injuries were grouped. Some 36 injuries or injury clusters were noted to Claire's head and neck, at least 19 of those being stab wounds. In addition, there was a stab wound to the lower back as well as 4 other stab wounds to the trunk. Injuries were located on Claire's arms, including a stab wound on the right arm and a through and through stab wound on the left index finger. In total, there were at least 26 defined stab wounds. The tip of the knife that was used by Pearson in his murderous attack on Claire was recovered from its position embedded in the midline frontal bone of Claire's skull, just above the frontal sinus. Rather shockingly, and quite sadly if you like, Claire would have been capable of some movement after sustaining the fatal injuries up until she was overcome by blood loss. Claire was pronounced dead by first responders at 6:17 p.m. When, sometime after 5:30 p.m, police arrived, they found Pearson in the hot tub with all the bloody water together with Claire's corpse, because by then she had died, even though she was only pronounced dead later on. Pearson was making a video of Claire's corpse, and in that video he can be heard shouting at the police officers saying "F you, you effing pig." By that point, Pearson had compressed Claire's neck and submerged her head and body in the blood-filled water that was in the hot tub. And when he called 999, which is something he did, he told the operator that he was drowning Claire to make sure that he had killed her.
Hi, my name is Aren Pearson.
Who are you?
I just killed my girlfriend in a hot tub in the garage at Ringville, the Annex, Sandnes.
What's your girlfriend's name?
Claire Leveque.
In court, Pearson said what I've already said, which is that Claire killed herself, stabbing herself all those times. She had drunk loads of alcohol, he said, and she'd also drunk brake fluid and then started rolling around in her own wee. The judge responded to those claims from Pearson by telling him to go and F himself, but using judge language. Aren's murder of Claire wasn't the first time that he'd been violent towards Claire. He had battered her on multiple occasions during her very short stay with him in Sandnes. Claire only got to Sandnes to live with Aren Pearson in October 2023. Not long after that, she confided in a neighbour in Shetland and in a cousin back home in Canada that Pearson was being physically violent towards her. One of Pearson's acts of violence on Claire took place on Claire's very 24th birthday. This was part of a sinister pattern of domestic abuse by Pearson, and it encompassed physical violence as well as coercive control. Because remember, she had nobody and she was stuck in the middle of nowhere. For the life of me, I can't trace why Pearson did what he did and why he was so violent and abusive towards Claire in the first place.
Your much younger girlfriend, your victim in this case, was isolated and vulnerable in Sanis. You had from almost the outset of her arrival there subjected her to a cruel campaign of violence and coercive control.
On the 15th of October 2025 in the High Court of Edinburgh, Pearson got life with a minimum term of 25 years. On the 8th of July 2024, Yostin Mosquera, a 35-year-old father of two and adult film actor from Colombia, murdered his sexual partner, 62-year-old Albert Alfonso, who used to pay him for his intimate services, along with that man's former civil partner, 71-year-old Paul Longworth, the murders taking place in the flat in Shepherd's Bush, West London, that the two victims shared. After the murders, Mosquera dismembered the bodies of the two men, stored their heads in a freezer that he got from Facebook Marketplace a day or two later, and then, quite randomly, put the rest of the two men's body parts into suitcases, got a man with a van to take him up to Bristol, and then dumped the cases on Clifton Suspension Bridge. That, thankfully, is as far as the man got before being caught. Mr. Alfonso enjoyed extreme sex, and watching videos of that nature online is how he first came across Mosquera and initiated a sexual friendship with him. And in the course of that friendship, he paid Mosquera to send him videos of himself performing you know what sorts of acts, which over time became more and more extreme. The Colombian met both Mr. Alfonso and Mr. Longworth in person when he travelled to London to visit them in 2023. When Mr. Alfonso invited Mosquera over to London for a second time, which happened in 2024, the two men started having extreme sex together on a regular basis. Mr. Alfonso and Mr. Longworth had since split up, but they remained both close friends and cohabitants of their Shepherd's Bush flat. Mr. Longworth, to clarify, wasn't involved in any sexual interactions with Mosquera. During his stay with Mr. Alfonso, Mosquera was well looked after. He was basically pampered and spoilt and mollycoddled. He got a trip to Brighton, a gym membership, language lessons and trips to bars, all arranged and paid for by Mr. Alfonso. Notwithstanding, on the 8th of July 2024, while Mr. Alfonso was at his job as a lifeguard at a local swimming pool, Mosquera bludgeoned Mr. Longworth to death with a hammer and then hid his body under a bed. Later on, when Mr. Alfonso came home, Mosquera and he started having extreme sex, which Mosquera filmed, and of course at this point, Mr. Alfonso had no idea what had happened to his former civil partner, Mr. Longworth. In the middle of the intimate act that Mosquera and Mr. Alfonso shared when Mr. Alfonso came home, Mosquera suddenly picked up a knife and stabbed Mr. Alfonso to death. In court, the jury was shown video footage that showed Mosquera singing and dancing in the shower with glee and satisfaction after murdering his sexual partner and friend. Mosquera was after his two victims' money, having looked up, in the days leading up to his acts, how to access Alfonso's bank account, while also researching the best ways to murder and to get rid of a body. After killing the two men, the perpetrator was actually able to get thousands out of Mr. Alfonso's bank account. He had also researched the value of the flat, which was owned by Mr. Alfonso, with a view, of course, to cashing it in, but God only knows how he hoped to be able to sell it. Mosquera had planned to dump the bodies into the River Avon, it turns out, but not only did he find that he had vastly underestimated how heavy the cases would be, making him struggle to lug them along as he made his way towards Clifton Suspension Bridge, passers-by were challenging him about the fact that blood was coming out of the case. This, for instance, is the moment when a cyclist asked the man what he was up to when he abandoned the suitcases and started running off.
Mira, mi jefe es muy malo.
This was the 999 call from a member of the public that led to Mosquera's arrest on the same night.
Because we're going to need some police up here quite urgently, I think. We had a gentleman up here who was dragging a case behind him. The case is broken and it looks like it's really heavy and there's blood coming out of it. He said it was car parts, oil. It doesn't smell of that at all. We're convinced it's blood.
I've got a hand, mate.
Go.
Yeah. I can say the words, I need secure.
Go.
Stay down, John, yeah.
Oh my God. What happened? Oh shit.
Secure.
On your side, mate.
What happened?
Move your legs out to the front. Sit up.
At this time, mate, you're under arrest on suspicion of murder. You don't have to say anything, but may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned, something you later rely in court. Anything you do say may be given evidence. Do you understand?
No. What?
You are currently under arrest for murder, okay?
What's your name, mate?
What?
What's your name? Nombre.
Jot.
Jot?
Yeah.
Jot or Joss?
Jot.
Surname? Jot what?
Jot. Mosquera.
Mosquera?
Yeah.
In court, Mosquera claimed that Mr Alfonso's killing was manslaughter by reason of loss of control, alleging that Mr Alfonso himself had killed his former civil partner and close friend Mr Longworth. He also said that Mr Alfonso had raped him every day of his stay with him and that threats had been made to his family over in Colombia, presumably by Mr Alfonso. These claims of Mosquera's were very easily disproven by the prosecution. What Mosquera did plead guilty to before his July 2025 trial, however, was possession of indecent images of very, very young people, let's say. On the 24th of October 2025 at Woolwich Crown Court, for his 2 acts of murder, Yostin Mosquera got life with a minimum term of 42 years. On the 3rd of February 2025, in the central courtyard of All Saints Catholic High School in Sheffield, South Yorkshire, 15-year-old Mohammed Umar Khan stabbed 15-year-old Harvey Wilgoose in his heart using a hunting knife that had a 13cm blade and a serrated edge. Harvey had been a pupil at the school in question since Year 7, but Mohammed had only joined in Year 9. Initially, Harvey and Mohammed were friends, but over the weekend of the 1st and the 2nd of February 2025, they got involved in an online argument relating to an incident at school that had occurred the previous week, 29th of January being the date. On that day, it had been necessary for staff to intervene in a dispute between 2 other boys in their year 10 this was, one of whom was Mohammed's friend. The other, we'll call him Boy X, had in the past been racist towards Mohammed and directed his friends to jump him and another boy and also threatened to stab Mohammed. Having tried to support his friend by intervening in that dispute and having informed staff that Boy X had a knife, he'd been sent home. The school had then gone into lockdown and the 2 boys who'd been fighting got suspended. Mohammed wasn't suspended from school but had decided not to come in on the following 2 days. His aunt had informed a member of staff that he was scared of going into school because of what had happened, but that she herself had told Mohammed that there was no need to be scared because the boys had been suspended. Harvey himself hadn't been in school on the day of lockdown or on the following 2 days either. Over the weekend of the 1st and 2nd of February, the incident from the 29th of January was discussed by members of a Snapchat group, which included Mohammed and Harvey. It led to both of the boys falling out because Harvey had sided with his friend and Mohammed had sided with his friend. Eventually, the 2 guys got kicked out of that Snapchat group because of their rowing. CCTV collected from a number of cameras around the school from the 3rd of February, which was the next day that both Harvey and Mohammed were in school, showed a number of interactions between the 2 boys before the moment of Mohammed's horrendous act. And those interactions, for the most part, seemed friendly and harmless. Early on that day, though, a teacher had asked Mohammed if he'd brought a weapon into school, and Mohammed lied and said no. At lunchtime that day, which began at 10 minutes past 12, Mohammed went to the dining room and he hooked up with a mate of his, and they both saw Harvey making his way along the external footpath from a room called the Damascus Room to the courtyard. Together with the friend that he'd hooked up with, Mohammed walked from the dining area out into the courtyard. Harvey started walking towards Mohammed, and when he reached him, he put his hand on Mohammed's right arm and told him that if he was going to try anything on him, he would smash him all over. That was testimony from a pupil who was standing right next to the two boys when this happened. In response, Mohammed took out the knife that he had on him and stabbed Harvey twice in the chest. At trial, a doctor, Dr. Lum, a pathologist, explained that the falls that Mohammed had used had been so severe that he had cut through the full thickness of one of Harvey's ribs. After he was stabbed by Mohammed, Harvey backed away, only for Mohammed to advance towards him across the courtyard before going back to where he'd been standing before and then gesturing at Harvey and appearing to shout something. Harvey somehow managed to then run back towards Mohammed, but again, Mohammed just advanced towards Harvey and he was dancing on his feet, he was waving the knife, he was totally enjoying what he'd done and what he was still doing. Harvey again backed away, and 49 seconds approximately after he was stabbed, he finally collapsed to the ground. Minutes later, he was dead, despite the intervention of paramedics and ambulance having been duly called, as well as the police. On the 22nd of October 2025 at Sheffield Crown Court, for the murder of Harvey Wilgoose, Mohammed Umar Khan got 16 years detention at His Majesty's pleasure, and that name is just what we call a life sentence given to someone who was aged under 18 at the time of their offence. On the 28th of September 2024, 35-year-old Philip Watson, who comes from Harrogate in North Yorkshire, subjected 56-year-old Paul Tillett to a prolonged and violent assault at his flat in Strawberry Dale, which culminated in Mr. Tillett's death. Watson was a drug addict, but so was Paul Tillett, and the prosecutor Jamie Hill KC said that Mr. Tillett had problems with drug dependency and also had a history of mental health issues including schizophrenia. He told the court that Mr. Tillett was a well-liked and gentle character, but that he'd been taken advantage of by other drug users who would congregate at his flat. I don't know that his flat had been the subject of cuckooing. The barrister said that Watson had previously bullied the victim, Mr. Tillett, resulting in Mr. Tillett going to the police. In the weeks before his death, the court heard that Watson had threatened Mr. Tillett with a knife, calling him a grass. On the night of the 28th of September 2024, a witness told police that they had been at Mr. Tillett's flat with Watson and two other people taking drugs. She said that at some point Watson had begun to attack Mr. Tillett and she had been forced to watch. Mr. Hill said, quote, Paul Tillett was punched and kicked in the head, stamped on, tied up, burnt with an aerosol can as a makeshift flamethrower, and his ears and nose were cut with nail clippers, unquote. Mr. Tillett was also stabbed in the bottom and had the letter W carved into his forehead. The attack amounted, according to the prosecution, and I think all right-minded people will agree, to torture. Mr. Tillett died in the early hours of the 29th of September as a result of his injuries. Passing sentence, Mr. Justice Hilliard said that Watson had carried out a prolonged and violent attack on a defenceless Mr. Tillett in his own home and said he was sure that revenge was one of the motivations for the murder. He said that Watson had shown a great deal of enthusiasm for inflicting pain, suffering and humiliation, amounting to sadistic conduct. In defence, David Lamb KC, the barrister for Watson, said that Watson had a difficult social background, having been disowned by his mother at the age of 14, and that he had struggled with extreme paranoia, thoughts of suicide, self-harm, anxiety and general depression. In a statement, Mr. Tillett's mother, Marjorie, said that she had been left heartbroken by her son's death. I'm living a nightmare and I want it to stop. Those were her words. On the 3rd of October 2025 at Leeds Crown Court, Philip Watson got life with a minimum term of 32 years. On the 5th of October 2023, together with his accomplice Tyrone Atwood, aged 34, 25-year-old Joshua Eno stole a motorbike from a BMW dealership in Battersea, South London. Later that day, though, someone nicked the bike from him. Believing that the person who stole it was 21-year-old Rico Andrews, Eno and Atwood went out looking for him, and when they found him, Joshua Eno shot him dead. In court, Eno said that losing a stolen motorbike was just an occupational hazard of being a robber, clearly trying to create the impression that he didn't even care about the bike. Of course, though, he couldn't go back and change the fact that he shot a man dead for stealing the bike. He also claimed that Mr. Andrews had accidentally shot himself with his gun in his interaction with him and Atwood. Eno was arrested outside a probation office days later with a large hunting knife found in the waistband of his trousers. Neither the gun nor the stolen motorbike, which was valued at £19,000, were ever recovered. Eno also admitted the theft of a Harley-Davidson motorbike on the same day as the murder of Mr. Andrews. Eno had further previous convictions for possessing machetes, making threats to kill, and was in breach of a suspended sentence for assaulting a female prison officer at the time of the sentencing. As regards Atwood, he was acquitted of Mr. Andrews' murder, but is currently serving a 7-year sentence for the BMW robbery. On the 10th of October 2025 at the Old Bailey, Joshua Eno got life with a minimum term of 30 years for the murder of Rico Andrews. On the 15th of October 2024, over in Great Baddow in Essex, in the southeast of England, 30-year-old father of one, Kieran Shepherd, lost his life to knife crime. However, there's a bit of a twist to this story. Kieran Shepherd was a drug addict, and whenever he couldn't get the money to buy drugs either for himself or for his partner, a lady called Alice Archer, he would go out and do thefts and robberies, and he would be armed with a lock knife. He was killed by Zach O'Keefe, who was aged 19 at the time, and he was assisted by Harrison Carpenter and Joseph Daw, who were all the same age when those three were sentenced, which happened on the 23rd of October 2025. They were all 20. Sometime before the 15th of October 2024, Kieran Shepherd went to meet Zach O'Keefe to buy drugs from him, and Harrison Carpenter went along with Zach O'Keefe. As the exchange took place, though, Kieran Shepherd produced a knife and robbed Zach O'Keefe. A few weeks later, Kieran either robbed or attempted to rob a 14-year-old child called Alfie of drugs. Alfie was an associate, whatever that means, of Zach O'Keefe. So as we can all imagine, Zach O'Keefe was positively fuming. First of all, he gets robbed by this guy, and then an associate of his also gets robbed by this guy. On the 15th of October 2024, O'Keefe, Daw and Carpenter went out together to find Kieran Shepherd. Kieran Shepherd had, on the morning in question, been out in the Meadgate area of Great Baddow buying drugs, and he actually went out altogether 3 times, but on that third occasion where he went with his dog, he never came back because he was stabbed to death. So O'Keefe, Carpenter and Daw came across Kieran Shepherd as he walked towards Meadgate Avenue. He was on his phone. CCTV shows him turning towards Carpenter, Daw and O'Keefe, and he started running, and then of course the three gave chase. They caught up with him, and next thing we know, Kieran was lying on the ground having been stabbed in his back twice by Zach O'Keefe. Kieran actually fell. He tripped and fell, and in doing so he enabled the 3 perpetrators to catch up with him. I've both mentioned and shown that Kieran Shepherd was by no means an innocent victim. However, murder is against the law. Yes, Zach O'Keefe and Alfie had every right to be angry with Kieran Shepherd. However, that doesn't suddenly make murder legal. I've also said that Carpenter and Daw didn't actually stab Kieran Shepherd. They did rough him up a bit though, and they did help O'Keefe kill him because they basically, well, they were 3 against 1. They all, were physically violent towards the victim, and on that basis they gained convictions for manslaughter, while O'Keefe, of course, got a conviction for murder. On the 23rd of October 2025 at Chelmsford Crown Court, for his manslaughter conviction, Dorr got 10.5 years, but only has to do a minimum of 2/3 before he gets out on licence. Carpenter got 11 years, but again only has to do 2/3 before he can apply to be released on licence. O'Keefe, on the other hand, got a life sentence. For murder, there is no other option. He has to do a minimum of 23 years minus time spent on remand before he can apply for parole. When, on the 14th of December 2024 in Bishop Auckland in the northeast, Jack Lawson took the life of Craig York, he was 7 weeks short of his 18th birthday. More importantly though, Craig York was never who Lawson had actually wanted to kill. Lawson's act of murder arose from a long-standing and simmering dispute that he had with someone called Jack Richardson, who was aged 18 at the time of the murder. In August 2022, you see, Richardson, supported by 3 others, came to a local park for a fight with a friend of Jack Lawson's who was called Marley Rolls. Marley Rolls gave Jack Lawson some gold rings for safekeeping, but then Richardson and his associate robbed Lawson of those possessions, and even though Lawson then went and reported the matter to the police, he then chose not to press the case because he was scared of the consequences. However, he couldn't get over it. He retained a lingering resentment at Richardson, and that resentment was only fanned by his understanding that Richardson was going around boasting about robbing Lawson. By pure coincidence, on the 13th of December 2024, Lawson and Richardson came across each other in a local Tesco, and immediately they started provoking each other. Later on, around 10:30 p.m. that night, there was a series of events which included both Lawson and Richardson driving around in their respective cars and goading each other to have a fist fight, which was to take place at a variety of suggested locations, including the open land at Old Lines, which is where the act of murder eventually took place. The events that I've mentioned that took place involved a short meeting between the two at Old Lines, followed by a high-speed car chase of several minutes through the street and a heated mobile phone conversation between the two men. Lawson had some female friends of his in the car with him. They were younger than him, but they were a lot more mature, and they pleaded with him to calm down and just forget about Richardson. There were in fact some calmer periods between 10:30 p.m. and the time when the murder took place, which was around 2:40 a.m. But ultimately we know what happened. When Lawson went to have his fist fight with Richardson, because that is what they were meant to be doing, he had dropped off all his female friends. He had someone with him though, a man called Connor Vint, who was aged 18. When Richardson, who had some associates with him, and Lawson got to the Old Lines again around 2:40 a.m. to have their long-awaited fist fight, Richardson and his group got out of a car and started trying to hit somebody who was in another car using African sticks. Lawson got out of his car and he was carrying a knife, and he went over to Richardson and his mates to try to scare them off. One of Richardson's friends ran away. Another of his, though, Craig York, came towards Lawson. He started trying to hit Lawson with his stick. Lawson stabbed him 3 times. He got him in the armpit, the chest and the groin. When Lawson finished stabbing him, he pushed back, turned round and ran away. Lawson denied having intended to kill or to cause York really serious harm and said that he just stabbed out of instinct. The judge actually agreed that Lawson didn't necessarily intend to kill York, but he disagreed that Lawson didn't intend to cause York serious harm, given the 3 stab wounds that he inflicted on York and where those 3 stab wounds were. York collapsed and died outside the nearby home of his cousin, Trevor Thompson. On the 7th of October 2025 at Teesside Crown Court, for the murder of Craig York, Jack Lawson got life with a minimum term of 18 years. On the 15th of December 2024, 35-year-old Claire Button, who comes from South Ockenden in Essex, smothered her 5-year-old son Lincoln to death. Button had been suffering from a mental disorder due to the relentless demands of her little boy, who was autistic and non-verbal. The perpetrator claimed to have started hearing voices in her head after a series of meltdowns that Lincoln had had in public. Before killing her little boy, Button called the emergency services for help but was told that there was a 10-hour wait. Lincoln's body was discovered by his father, Nicky, when he arrived at the family home in Winstar Drive after work. Button told him that she had been hearing a dark, deep, scary, demanding voice in her head, instructing her to murder her little boy. After her act, Button tried to commit suicide, but her husband came home in time to stop her. In court, Judge Lee described the case as one of the hardest that he had heard in the last 30 years, calling it truly heartbreaking. He said that he understood that Button had become so desperate that the lack of help and no response from 999 was the final straw. He commented straight after, though, that is no excuse for what she did. Her little boy was just that, a little boy, vulnerable, and she was in a position of trust towards him, and she totally betrayed that trust. It was urged furthermore by prosecutors that Button's level of mental illness did not substantially impair her judgment and rationality, so therefore her plea of guilty to manslaughter on grounds of diminished responsibility was defeated. On the 17th of October 2025 at Basildon Crown Court, Button got life with a minimum of just 9 years. On the 8th of January 2025 in Bedford, South England, 17-year-old Thomas Taylor was stabbed to death by 18-year-old Bennett Ndenkeh, who was assisted by Riaz Miah, aged 17. This was a gang murder. It turns out that Riaz Miah had, a few days before Thomas's murder, been assaulted by someone from Thomas's gang, and there are messages between Miah and Ndenkeh that show that they were planning to get their own back on Thomas and his gang. The murder took place on the date named in the town centre when Ndenkeh and his gang came across Thomas and his gang. The fact is, though, that Ndenkeh's gang was much larger than Thomas's gang. It was just Thomas and 2 other people. Ndenkeh was carrying a knife that had a 10-inch blade, and he was described in court as the spearhead of his gang. That said, Thomas and his 2 associates were also carrying knives. Then again, when Ndenkeh and his gang confronted Thomas and his 2 associates, Thomas ran away. Ndenkeh, though, soon caught up with him and stabbed him 3 times. Thomas collapsed into the arms of a passerby, and his last words before he died were, "Please call my mum." In contrast, after killing Thomas, Ndenkeh, along with his gang, was totally triumphant and jubilant, no remorse whatsoever. In the course of his trial, though, Ndenkeh wrote a letter to the judge saying, quote, "I'm not proud of my actions, and although I can't tell them personally, I apologise to Thomas's family." For his part, Miah too wrote a letter to the judge, and he said that he wished he could go back in time. Miah didn't actually lay a finger on Thomas, but due to his participation in the setup of the altercation, he was still criminally liable, and he was in fact convicted of manslaughter, for which he received an 8-year custodial term. As for Ndenkeh, on the 10th of October 2025 at Luton Crown Court, he got life with a minimum term of 22 years because he was, of course, guilty of Thomas Taylor's murder. Antonis Antoniades was a tourist on a visit over from Greece who was killed in the course of a robbery that took place on the 7th of July 2024 and involved no fewer than 5 perpetrators. As Mr Antoniades was leaving 32 Portland Place nightclub in central London in the early hours of the 7th of July 2024, he was targeted and followed by the men who all come from Camden, and they were after his Lacoste bag and his Versace watch. Having come over on holiday to London for a week with a couple of friends, Mr Antoniades and his friends were staying at an address in New Cross, South East London, and had booked an Uber to take them home. What they didn't realise during their Uber ride was that they were being followed. After the Uber dropped them off at their address and they got out and walked the short distance to their front door, on arriving at the property, Mr Antoniades was approached by 4 figures in hoods and balaclavas. The 5th man stayed in the car to prepare for their getaway. A struggle then followed. Mr. Antoniades tried to fight his attackers off with everything he had. At one point, he actually managed to hit one of them with a brandy bottle that he was still holding from his night out. However, it was 1 against 4. The 4 punched him and kicked him and then stabbed him in the chest and thigh. Mr. Antoniades died in hospital 2 weeks later on the 21st of July. When the gang was sentenced at the Old Bailey, there was laughter in the dock when a man in the public gallery shouted out that proceedings were corrupt, adding, "Keep your heads up, don't let the system break you." Judge Rebecca Trowler KC warned against further outbursts, telling the convicts, "I am observing the majority of you, not all, laughing and demonstrating complete failure to respect this process and indeed the damage that you have caused." She said that statements given by the victim's family and friends outlined their unimaginable distress. She said, "By all accounts, Antonis was a kind, caring, loving, funny and sociable young man, described by his friend in particular as a true gentleman. He was plainly deeply loved and his death has taken a heavy toll on his family in different ways as well as on his friends." Mr. Antoniades' parents, Stella and Yanis Antoniades, said the unjust and inhumane loss of their son had left them devastated. On the 8th of October 2025 at the Old Bailey, Sofian Alici, who was 20, got at least 25 years as the minimum term of his sentence. His 18-year-old brother, Amin Alici, was given 22 years. Joshua McCorkadale, who is 21, was given 26 years. And Alfie Hipple, aged 18, was detained with a minimum of 23 years. They were all convicted of murder and conspiracy to rob, and the fifth person, whose name is Sheehan Johnson and who is aged 26, got the longest sentence. 28 years is his minimum term. On the 28th of July 2024 in Gainsborough in Lincoln, 39-year-old Stephanie McLaggan murdered her previous lover, Gillian Connolly, aged 44, with a single stab wound. That act of murder of Stephanie McLaggan was far from being the woman's first criminal offence. McLaggan's act of murder took place at the home of a mutual friend. It's thought that prior to the attack, Miss Connolly might have been bickering with McLaggan about the fact that McLaggan was pregnant with a new boyfriend. McLaggan then followed Miss Connolly into the kitchen and stabbed her as they tussled on the floor. Miss Connolly was left bleeding to death at the base of the stairs. During the hearing, defence barrister Clive Stockwell KC argued that there wasn't enough evidence to conclude McLaggan of North Warren Road intended to kill Miss Connolly. He said that on any view this happened quickly, it was heated, there was only one entry wound. He also made the point that McLaggan had given birth in custody and that her child would never be with her. He was saying all this not to deny that McLaggan had committed an act of murder, but it was in anticipation of her sentencing, trying to get her the shortest sentence possible. For his part, prosecutor Paul Cavan KC said that the stabbing came totally out of the blue and that only McLaggan knew her motive. In passing sentence, Judge House said that there were aggravating factors, including the fact that there were 2 children in the house at the time of the murder and that McLaggan had previous convictions for violence and possessing offensive weapons. McLaggan was found guilty of the murder of Gillian Connolly at the conclusion of a 2-week trial at Lincoln Crown Court. On the 9th of October 2025 at the same Lincoln Crown Court, McLaggan got life with a minimum term of 18 years. There is so much more to the act of murder committed by 36-year-old Laura Shanley on the 17th of September 2024 than I am actually able to report, simply because I just can't trace the full details to the woman's act of murder. On the 17th of September 2024, Shanley stabbed to death 34-year-old Alfred Corbett, who was known to his family and friends as Jamie. She was meant to have had a coercive, controlling influence over Jamie. However, I don't know the details of that coercive control, and I also can't say what sort of relationship, if any, the two were in, other than the fact that it was allegedly a coercive controlling one, Shanley being the one to do the coercive controlling. The murder took place in Coventry in the West Midlands. In the early hours of the date mentioned, Shanley was with Jamie at an address in Edmund Road. Next thing we know, Shanley picked up a knife and stabbed Jamie in the chest before almost immediately kneeling down next to him and shouting, "What have I done?" When police arrived, Shanley told officers that Jamie had arrived home bleeding, having already been stabbed. She also asked another woman who was inside the house if she would lie to the police about what happened, asking her, "Have you got my back?" Despite this, the knife that was used to kill Jamie was found in the kitchen sink, leading to Shanley being arrested and taken into custody. Earlier that day, Shanley had been out in the city drinking with friends, meeting up later with Jamie, who had been at a staff party. In her interview, Shanley maintained that Jamie had come home with a stab wound before attempting to blame someone else, before finally admitting that she was the one who stabbed him. Jamie's family paid tribute to their loved one, saying, "Although no sentence will ever feel enough for taking an innocent life, we are grateful to the police, the CPS and the jury for their hard work to ensure that the trial secured the right verdict. Our grief for the loss of a beautiful son and brother will be lifelong, and none of us will ever be whole or complete again. We wish we could turn back time to when Jamie was happy and safe with a family who loved him before he met Laura Shanley, but we can't." On the 10th of October 2025 at Warwick Crown Court, Shanley got life with a minimum of 16 years. If this video has gripped you, I recommend you to watch this one next. I'll meet you there.